This is Mitch Jason from the Los Angeles Chess Club. We're in beautiful Santa Monica, California, and today's lesson is the game of the century.
Rolling camera 2. Okay, rolling on the mic. All right, ready? Let's get our arm markers up. 3, 2, 1. Great, thank you. And 3, 2.
Hi, this is Mitch Jason. I'm here at the beautiful International Chess Park in Santa Monica, California. We're about 3 miles from the LA Chess Club. Today's lesson is from the game of the century. That's the 20th century, not the 21st. The game was between 13-year-old Bobby Fischer and 26-year-old Donald Byrne, whose brother at the time was the United States champion. The game went 42 moves, and Bobby sacrificed his queen, but wound up winning. And why is that? Because Byrne never did something that all chess players should do early in the game, and that is castle your king. If you don't castle your king early, you will get checkmated in the center of the board. This game made Bobby Fischer's reputation. He was just a 13-year-old boy playing at the Marshall Chess Club in the Rosenwald Tournament, 1956. Bobby was playing the black pieces. Donald Byrne, who at the time was himself a very high master, rated somewhere around 2350. Bobby's official rating at the time was somewhere around 2240. And they had heard about this young, phenomenal young chess player who had sort of made a reputation for himself over the last year or two, playing around the country, giving simultaneous exhibitions. So Bobby came into New York, and he was paired with Donald Byrne, and Byrne was playing white, Bobby was playing black. Byrne started with knight f3. Great opening move, and immediately controls 2 center squares. As a matter of fact, over the last 35 years, computer analysis, and believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, we didn't have computers until 35 years ago, at least PCs. The computer has analyzed the opening moves for white and found that knight f3 is the best opening move, even over e4. It's probably because it clears out one of the pieces getting ready to castle immediately, and at the same time immediately controls 2 center squares. So Fischer, being a young 13-year-old, he had just turned 13 a week before, decided that if it's good enough for white, it's certainly good enough for black. He immediately controls 2 center squares. And he decided to play what's called a delayed Grunfeld opening. All of these opening patterns are in the MCOs, which is called the Modern Chess Opening Book. There's nothing original here for either white or black, just that white decided to open with knight f3. Bobby played knight f6. Byrne played pawn to c4, which if he had started with, and then Bobby had played knight f6, would have been called an English opening. What he's doing is he's immediately challenging Fischer's control of the d5 square. So Bobby said, okay, you can have the center, but I will immediately castle my king and have a very safe king. And Byrne said, okay, knights before bishops, I will develop my knight behind this pawn, and now I am negating the power of your knight on these 2 center squares with my knight. And Fischer said, yes, that's true, but I will have a very safe king because I will be castling immediately. Byrne played pawn to d4, taking the center control. As you can see, these 4 center squares, which is what chess usually is about during the game, he who controls, or she who controls these 4 center squares, usually controls the flow and tempo of the game. And after d4, Bobby said, thank you very much. I now have a safe castled king. Over the last 35 years, computer analysis has shown that a king that is castled, as opposed to a king that is still in the center, is 4 moves safer. This king is 4 moves safer than this king. It just means that white will take an extra 4 moves to crack open this formation around the castled king. So, after Bobby castled, Byrne decided that he would develop another piece, bishop to f4. I think at this point, and most masters agree, that Byrne should have played pawn to e3, got the bishop out, and castled his own king. But Byrne was playing a 13-year-old, and he said, I'm sure that if I get my pieces out on the board, I'll be able to create the necessary combinations that I can overwhelm this kid, right? So Bobby's saying to himself, and I know this is what he was thinking, I have a castled king. You do not have a castled king. My job is to crack the center files open, put my bishop and queen and rooks, and come down and checkmate you. So I will immediately crack the center open. So pawn to d5. Now in chess, Byrne could have taken with a trade, pawn takes, knight would have taken back the pawn. If knight had taken the knight, the queen would have taken, and it would have been an even-steven trade of knight, pawn, and Fischer's queen would have been in the center of the board and probably emitting a whole lot of power on the 4 center squares. So it's probably not in white's best interest to initiate the trade. As a matter of fact, in chess, it's better to let your opponent initiate the trade, because right now, Byrne got a free move. And sure enough, Bobby said, I will take. And Byrne said, yes, but that's the reason I put my queen up here, is to take back. So after the initial trade of pawn for pawn, Byrne has 4 pieces developed. He's controlling the center very nicely, and Bobby's compensation was that he had a very safe castled king. Now, if you take a look at the board, after Byrne took this pawn back, this bishop here is attacking the c7 pawn once. Byrne's queen is attacking it twice. Fischer's queen is only guarding it once, so he's in jeopardy of losing that pawn, so Bobby saw that immediately, and he just pushed the pawn, okay? At this point, Byrne again probably should have pushed the pawn here, or even here, got his bishop up, and castled his king, but he didn't do that. What he did is he brought his rook over to give the queen a little X-ray right through this pawn. So Bobby took it away. Byrne decided that he would take the center, and he developed. Bobby immediately attacked Byrne's, he immediately attacked Byrne's queen. So Byrne had to make a decision. He brought his queen up. Okay. Bobby developed the bishop, creating what on this rook? We call that a pin. Correct. Normally the queen is here for the pin, but it works just as well with the rook. A rook is a major piece. It's not worth 10 points like the queen, but it is worth 5. The knight's only worth 3. Now again, Byrne probably should have just put the bishop here and got rid of the pin and then castled. But for some reason, he decided that he would like to create a pin on Bobby's queen and prevent this pawn from being pushed, so he would have a pin on this knight to the queen, right? Well, at this point, Fischer came up with one of the first novelties of this specific opening pattern that had never been played before. And he decided that he would fork the queen and the knight. Well, at first look, why does this look a little strange? Why can't this knight just take this knight for free? It looks like he's just hanging a knight. What's the job of this knight? It's guarding this pawn. If this knight does take this knight will take the pawn, forking the queen and the bishop. What's protecting the bishop? The queen on this rank. No matter where the queen goes to escape the knight, it can't stay on this rank because it'll be captured. So, after about 35 minutes of analyzation, Byrne decided that it's not in his best interest to take this knight because his whole center would collapse. So he just retreated his queen. And Fischer decided that it would be time to take the knight, so they traded knights, and he took back with the pawn. So again, an even-steven trade. Of course, now that this knight is not here to guard this pawn, Fischer decided that he would take it. The problem with taking that is that it opened up this bishop on the e7 pawn, along with the queen on the e7 pawn, giving Byrne a fork of the queen and the rook if he wanted to use it. And he immediately did, attacking the queen and the rook. And everybody said, we thought you were supposed to be a great prodigy. You couldn't see one move into the future. You couldn't see the fact that your queen and your rook were going to be skewered like this, double attacked. So Bobby said, okay, I'm going to save my queen, and please feel free to take my rook. Well, if Byrne takes the rook and the bishop takes back, immediately attacking the queen will have to move. The problem with that is that this queen will then be free to come along after this knight takes this pawn, and what happens is this rook can pin the bishop to the king because the king hasn't castled yet because the knight's gone, and the entire center of Byrne's totally collapses, even if he gets an exchange, a rook for a bishop, which is 1 point in power because bishops do go up to 4 points in endgame, so rooks are now 5. So even for that 1 point, it's not worth it for Byrne because his king is still vulnerable sitting in the center because he hasn't done what yet, guys? Castle. So at this point, instead of taking the rook, Byrne decided that he would finally develop the light squared bishop and he better get his king castled. It's getting a little dangerous with all these pieces in the center here. So Bobby said, hey, guess what? I'm going to take this pawn. Now, at first look again, the point being that the queen can take this knight and you only got a pawn for a knight, you just lost 2 points. But you can immediately see that this rook will now move over, pin the bishop to the king. There is no way to save this bishop. Even if the queen goes back, the queen will hit it twice, okay? So after looking at this whole thing and studying it again and getting into time trouble, Byrne said, enough of you, kid. I'm just going to attack your queen. Well, Bobby must have figured this out beforehand because the first thing he said is, check. You cannot take my queen when your king is in check. Now, 3 ways to stop a check. Remember, you can put something in between here and block. You can simply move the king away, or you can capture the piece that's saying check. Well, there's no way to capture this rook, so that's out. There are ways to block, but each of the blocks are really very not effectual, and they will cause a loss of material. So after studying the board over and over again, Byrne just decided he would move his king away, saying, hey, you still have to worry about your queen. Well, now that the king has moved, no longer can he castle, and this rook seems to be a dead piece. Now the move that has made Fischer's reputation, even 10 years after his death. People still talk about this move, and they still analyze it over and over and over again. Bishop to e6. Take my queen, please. Well, Byrne, being a very high master, said, okay, what are the consequences of me taking your queen? You will take my bishop. You will say check to my king. My king cannot escape anywhere over here because of this open rook file. I will have to come over here. Your knight will then come over here and say check. I will have to come back. Your knight can go back and forth. And I'll be in a windmill, and it'll be a perpetual check. It'll be a draw, and I probably deserve a draw for not castling sooner. So, very nice, kid. Okay, congratulations, you've drawn me. Okay, so and that's what I'll accept, because I probably should have castled much sooner. So sure enough, Byrne took Bobby's queen, and Bobby took the bishop and said, check, just like we said.
And the queen sacrifice is why I picked that game, because that made Bobby Fischer's reputation. There was one other problem that Donald Byrne also had, and that was he didn't castle his king early. If you don't castle your king early, you will get checkmated in the center of the board. And sure enough, Byrne went to g1, and the knight goes to e2 and says check, and the king goes back, and the knight did not go back here. What the knight did is he stole this pawn and opened up the bishop with what we call a discovered check. So he got a little pawn along with that bishop that he took over there. So now he got 5 points, a bishop 4, 1 for a pawn, so 10 for 5, so he's only down 5 points right now. And the king goes back, and the knight goes back, and the king goes back, but he didn't go back where the pawn was. He went back here to attack the rook again and say check again, and if he goes back and he does it one more time, it'll be a draw. Because it'll be a third time repetition. In chess, when you do the exact same 3 checks 3 times in a row, you get your draw. And Byrne was happy with the draw because obviously he had made a mistake and not castled sooner, which he finally figured out. But Bobby did not take this rook, which everybody in the world thought he was going to do, because he'd get a bishop, a pawn, and a rook, which is 10 for 10. And it's very clever, and it's very interesting, and it's sort of cute, okay? But it's sort of even. So where is this brilliancy that we've been hearing about? Well, here is the move, ladies and gentlemen, that the whole world missed, including the grandmasters that were annotating this game in the other room at the Marshall Chess Club. There's a move now that's going to be played that everybody missed, but Fischer must have seen at the beginning of this sequence. Pawn takes bishop, which immediately attacks the queen. So he can't save this rook if his queen's under attack, and obviously the queen can't take the rook because it's protected by the rook. The queen would love to come over and take this knight, but look what's protecting it, this bishop. So Byrne, yes?
The king is still in check.
Yes, so he had, yes, he checked him again when the knight went back, and he came back. You're absolutely right, sorry, Miss. After this, the queen went up to attack the bishop. And everybody thought he was going to take the rook here. But the rook slid down to protect the bishop. Now take a look at this formation, guys. This is the greatest, to me, the greatest formation in the history of chess with pieces, to show you how pieces work in perfect harmony and synchronicity. This knight protects the rook, which attacks the queen, which protects the bishop, and this knight is protected by this bishop. These 4 pieces are working in perfect sync. And that's how chess pieces should be working, all together in perfect harmony. So after looking at every possible thing, Byrne just took a free pawn, and Bobby finally took his rook. So at the end of the sequence, he got this bishop, he got this pawn, he got this bishop, and he got this rook for the queen. So he got a rook, 2 bishops, and a pawn for the queen and the pawn, which was 14 for 11. He made 3 points in the deal. Now this rook is going to come down and say checkmate to this king, because this knight is not going to be here for very long when this bishop comes here and attacks it. So Byrne saw that he was going to be mated. So he created an escape square for his king. Bobby took a free pawn. The king came up, and Bobby took another free pawn. So as you can see, he's running out of material. Byrne is running out of material very quickly. And after taking this free pawn, okay, so Byrne came over and said, let's trade rooks. You take me and I'll take you. I can't let you have a double rook. So Fischer said, okay, we'll trade rooks. But instead of taking him immediately, Byrne gave him what we call in chess a spike check. The check really doesn't do much. I mean, maybe it pins the bishop to the king. Okay, so knight takes rook, bishop back, queen over to attack this pawn. Bobby said, no, not today. And Byrne said, how about me coming this way and cracking open the cubbyhole over here, and Bobby said, no, not today. All right, let me get my knight back in the game. I'll get my knight back in the game. I'll come over here and attack you here. I'm getting off this pin. And as you can see, this bishop skewer is coming, protected by the knight, and it's hitting the king. The knight will be pinned. So he immediately got off the pin from the king. And now it's all over. Check to the king. F1. Check to the king. Remember, all of these squares are taken away by this rook. King over. Check to the king. 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 The only square left. And Shachmat, the king is dead. This game made Fischer's reputation, and it followed him all the way until he passed away 10 years ago. The key move, of course, was bishop to e6, giving up the queen. And the Russians have analyzed this over the last 60 years or so, and they've come to the conclusion that there's no way that Byrne should be taking the queen. He cannot allow it. He should have taken the bishop and foregone the queen. Because no matter what happens, if he takes that queen, all of this happens. There's no way to forestall it, okay? And Donald Byrne was never really the same after this game. And while his brother didn't disown him, it was a little bit of an embarrassment. Anyway, that made Fischer's reputation. That's why they call it the game of the century, the 20th century. Thank you.
The Queen Sacrifice is why I picked that game, because that made Bobby Fischer's reputation, which defined his career for the next 15 years until he won the World Championship in 1972 over Boris Spassky from Russia. This is Mitch Jason from the LA Chess Club, signing off.